Thank you, Raymond. That was very powerful. Thank you very much for sharing with that. We welcome Pastor Mark back. It's nice that they had a little vacation, he and Vicki, and glad to see him refreshed and powerful and eager and happy. We got Kenny back. I don't know where he was. He was out wandering around, but it's good to have him back. And it's nice to see some of you back today as well. In 1914, the American poet Robert Frost got very frustrated with his neighbor. He lived up in New England, and the neighbor every spring wanted Robert to help him rebuild a wall that ran between their two properties, a wall made out of rocks and stones. Over the year, the weather and erosion would make some of the boulders fall down, and so the neighbor wanted Robert Frost to walk along and put the boulders back up. And Robert Frost didn't understand why. He said, neither one of us have cattle. We don't raise livestock. There's nothing going to cross the boundary. I don't hate you. You don't hate me. We don't have a feud. We don't need to deal with that. He said, you raise apple trees, I raise pine trees. I don't think your apple trees are going to come over here and eat my pine cones, and I don't think my pine trees are going to sneak over and eat your apples. Why on earth do we have to put all this energy into putting this wall back up every year? And his friend just quoted an old proverb that his friend's father had taught him, which is, good fences make good neighbors. About the fifth time the neighbor says that old proverb from his father, Robert Frost says, well, before I built a wall, I'd want to know who is the wall keeping in and who is the wall keeping out. That's a good question about a wall, isn't it? Why is it built? Who's it keeping in? Who's it keeping out? Now, not all walls are built to do that. We have walls here in the Washington area that are built for other reasons, right? We have a wall that commemorates all those who died in the Vietnam War. That's not to keep anybody in or out. We have a World War II wall that does the same kind of thing. There's a big wall at the Holocaust Museum that helps us remember all those who died to Hitler's mania. There's all those walls, but normally walls are built either to keep somebody in or keep somebody out. The Berlin Wall, you remember that one, don't you? It was built to keep people in so that folks who lived in East Germany would not run to freedom. The Great Wall of China, which was started in about 700 AD, and it goes 13,000 miles. It was built to keep nomads from Asia and from Europe from coming into imperial China. So that wall was built to keep people out. The Berlin Wall was built to keep people in. I think this proposed wall that we sometimes hear about in this country to run along our border with Mexico, it's basically, the theory is to keep desperate people out. I don't think anybody's worried that folks from Texas or Arizona or California will flee into Mexico if there's no wall. I think it's to keep people out. So some walls, you build castle walls to keep people out. You build prison walls to keep people in. It's a good question when you see a wall. Who's that wall keeping out? Who's it keeping in? When we get to our passage today, Zechariah is having a vision. He had all his visions in one night. Some people think maybe he ate too much falafel or something, but he had all these visions in one night. This is the third vision. You ever have a night like that where you get a dream after a dream? And yeah, well, that's what he's having. In this vision, he sees a man out walking the perimeter of Jerusalem, and he's got a measuring instrument in his hand. And Zechariah says, hey, buddy, what are you up to here in the middle of the night, moonlit as it is? What are you doing out here? And he says, I'm measuring the length and the width of Jerusalem. We soon come to find out he's measuring so they can rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. So here's our question. Is that wall going to be built to keep people out or keep people in? Well, it's to keep people out. The Samaritans and other people in the vicinity that were going to try to come into Jerusalem, either by force or for some other reason, the Jews wanted them kept out. There was nobody afraid that the Jewish people living in Jerusalem would flee into the surrounding wilderness if there was no wall. It was built to keep people out. And notice this guy's measuring it because he's going to build the wall just like it was back in the day. 70 years ago, we're going to rebuild that wall. It's not going to be any bigger, not going to have a different shape, not out of any other new material. It's going to be the very same shape and perimeter as the old wall. It's going to look just like the wall. He wants to build his daddy's wall just like Robert Frost's neighbor wanted to do things like his daddy said. Also note that the wall was extremely ineffective. This man is literally stepping over the rubble and stones of the previous wall. It had never kept anybody out. Egyptians came in, the Syrians came in, the Philistines came in, the Assyrians came in, the Babylonians came in. Everybody knocked that wall down. It was particularly ineffective to keep anybody out, and yet this guy's out there wandering around in the middle of the night measuring because he's going to rebuild that wall exactly like it was back in the day, a wall that never worked in the first place. That's a special kind of foolishness in a way. There's a restaurant over here by Beltway Plaza. Used to be a Thai restaurant, I think some of you old-timers would know, and people liked it. I think it was fairly successful. People would go over there and eat. But then the family sold it and got out of the business. And the next family that bought it put in a fried chicken restaurant. Now, if you know me, you know I'm all for that. I think we need fried chicken as close to every one of us as we can get it. And I went there. I was a patron. I took some of you there. I think we've eaten there. And I liked it. But then I started thinking, you know, this chicken is not really any better than Popeyes. It's twice the price of Popeyes. Plus, I got to sit here and be served, which means I got to tip. That's going to add more money to this. And I started thinking, I'm not doing this anymore. I went back to Popeyes. And evidently, a lot of people had that same thought because the restaurant closed. A few months later, it was repainted, remodeled, a new sign came out there, and guess what they were going to sell? Fried chicken. Different name, different kind. It's going to be fried chicken. This second restaurant lasted shorter than the first one. It went out of business pretty soon. I noticed this week, I drove by that very same restaurant. They're repainting it. They're getting ready to remodel it. They're going to put up a new sign. Now, if that sign says something about fried chicken, somebody ought to lose their business license, don't you think? Evidently, we don't want any more fried chicken in this neighborhood. We've had it up to here with the fried chicken. It's not going to work if you keep doing the same thing over and over and just put a different coat of paint on it. That's not a good plan. That's what this guy's plan is. And as Zechariah is watching him do this, two angels come up, and one says to the other, "Run to that young man and tell him this." Run to that young man and tell him this. The idea is he's got to stop this guy. This guy's doing a foolish act. Run to that young man and he'll know what to do. In other words, we don't need the vision of a 70-year-old generation now. We need the vision of the young man. Run to the young man. This, I told you last week, we believe Zechariah was in his 20s. This is one of the clues. There are several others, but that he was a young man. He had a different vision. It says, run to that young man and help him see things differently. Now, this is a sermon series on redeeming the church and rebuilding the church. And I think we would make a very foolish mistake if we sat around here and thought, now how we rebuild this is to do it just exactly like they did it 80 years ago. Let's just repeat all we used to do then. It'll all work. We'll be right back in business. Let's just do things like it used to be done. Even if we thought, let's do what John did 25 years ago. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that plan and do that. Now, that's not going to work. Can we get an amen to that? That's just not going to work. We're in a whole different world now. We're on television. Hi, y'all. We have more people worshiping with us online than we do sitting in here, about 3 times as many. That's a new thing. Whether that's good or bad, you can think about it, but it's different anyway. So you can't go back and just replicate the old ways. We're going to have a fresh vision, a new vision, something that comes from God that's inspired for the future. That's how we're going to have to rebuild. I'm grateful about a development in our church. The chair of our deacons, the chair of our transition team, the chair of our administrative commission, the chair of our trustees, our church treasurer, and our church clerk are all in their late 30s or early 40s. Now, that's young for this church. Can we get an amen to that? That's the toddlers in this church. We've been praying for this to happen for a long, long time. And it's not without its problem. You got to train folk, right? They got to learn how to do it. But they're coming up and doing it. And I put out this appeal to all of our members who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Come back to church, step into leadership, and help us form a new vision for the coming. Not that we don't want the old folks to give us their wisdom. We got to have that. You all have lived longer than the 20s and 30s. But your vision's not going to make the church go that direction. It's going to have to be the vision of the young man, said the angel. Go to the young man and give him the vision. And then listen to what he tells him then. He says, go run to that young man, and you tell him, build the city without walls. Wow. It must have stunned him. Go tell him, stop this guy who's measuring the perimeter to rebuild the wall. You're going to have a city now without walls. It's going to be made up of villages, little groups. In other words, he's saying Jerusalem's going to become cosmopolitan. People from all sorts of regions and cultures and languages are going to come. And we got to have a church that doesn't, a temple that doesn't have walls. We have to have a city, a community that doesn't have walls, that welcomes everybody. And yeah, there'll be little villages who speak this language or dress this way or eat this stuff or have this culture. But they're going to all come together as one to worship the living God and to serve God's majestic name. That's the vision. In other words, what he's saying is, I think you've gotten too good at building these walls. You've kind of got that down. Look at the population of Jerusalem. There's nobody here. There's nobody to run the stores. There's nobody to run the market. There's nobody to run the military. There's nobody to run anything. You ever get that feeling these days? You go to a fast food restaurant, there's one person doing French fries, doing it on the phone. It looks like you need 3 more hands, buddy. You go to your doctor's office, you go to the pharmacist, now they close in the middle of the day, and there's one person back there because they can't have lunch. There's it's all shrinking. And so Jerusalem was like that. There weren't enough people, and the angel says, I think you got this wall building thing down. Now you need to go the other way. Can you not hear the message for the church in that? We got too good at building walls. Yeah, we did. It used to be the whole purpose, build walls. White churches built walls to keep black folks out. Did you know that? Did anybody know that? Are you all deaf? What happened here? Yeah, they built them. They put it in their constitution. They trained their ushers. They literally trained their ushers. Don't let people of color in here. Wow. And black churches, they started seeing that white folks were coming in and singing in the choir and doing this. And then pretty soon, the white folks who had a little more money and maybe a little more education, they started taking over everything. So the black churches said, we don't want no more white folks in here. This is the only institution we have. We're not going to turn it over to you folk. Walls were built. Keep white folks out of black churches. Walls were built. Keep black folks, brown folks out of white churches. That's what went on for years and years and years. We built walls to relegating women to subordinate roles if they had any role at all. We built walls to keep out those with public sins out. We didn't keep sinners out. Church has always been full of sinners. We ought to get an amen to that. We didn't keep sinners out. We kept those whose sins were registered somewhere in public. If you were divorced, hit the road, Jack. If you were an unwed mother, woo, you come in here, oh no, thank you for playing, but you're out of here. We rejected population after population after population. Built walls everywhere. Architectural walls to keep disabled, they didn't get in. Kept immigrants out. We did use language walls and barriers. We built theological walls, moral walls, denominational walls. And it worked all right in the 1950s and 60s because 63% of the population went to church every Sunday. So you could build all the walls you want and still have a full church. But we got too good at building those walls, and then the inner population of the congregations began to dwindle, and we looked around and said, what happened? Well, we got too many walls. That's what happened. Keeping everybody out, homeless, unemployed, gay, lesbian. No, don't come in here. This ain't your place. Go, 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 till there was nothing hardly left inside. This is a message for our church. This is a message for every church. Build your community of faith without walls. Welcome whoever comes, whoever God brings, you welcome. Yeah, you're going to have villages. You're going to have children's church down the hallway. You may have youth worship. You may have some worship services in different languages. You may need all of that. You may need small groups of people who have common desires and designs and going through the same phases or stages of life. Those are all villages. Mission groups, those are all villages, but they don't have walls between them. No, they're open and they flow and they come together to love one another and to have fellowship with one another and to worship and serve the living God. That is the vision of rebuilding. Only way to do it. We've become too good at building those walls. You know, if we did the survey, I don't want to break this too hard to you. If we did the survey, about half of the members of this church are here because they got kicked out of somebody else's church. Can we get an amen to that? That is the gospel truth. They got run out because they were women, and they said, no, there's no place. A whole denomination kicked out half of you. It used to be that saying, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me. Well, you came to a church that would have you. We got run off for this reason and that reason, and just, listen to the testimonies here. You're going to hear them. I didn't have a place there. They made me feel uncomfortable there. They didn't want me there. I couldn't worship there. I couldn't put up with this. They couldn't put up with me, and we came here. And now we have a church, and we want to keep building a church without walls to welcome any person who wants to come to worship and love God and serve God. That's the vision. There's a pastor named Reverend Eston Williams. He pastored for many, many years the Alley United Methodist Church in 7 Points, Texas, wherever that is. I don't know where that is. But Reverend Williams retired in 2019. That church was the only church he ever served. And he spent most of his life trying to get the church to tear down walls that they had built to keep other people out. Some of the many walls I've just discussed. At his retirement, they asked him, local paper asked him, why did you take this sort of radical stance? You know, you lost members, the denomination disowned you. You got criticism from everywhere. And Reverend Eston Williams said this, a little complicated thought, but I like it. He said, I decided that I'd rather be excluded by people because of who I included than I would be included by people because of who I excluded. It's an interesting thought. It's kind of a tongue twister. I'd rather be excluded because of who I included, rather than be included by people because of who I excluded. That's a church without walls. That's the vision. See, no walls, except one. Except one. Did you read it? There is a wall here. It's that wall of fire about me. I've nothing now to fear. God said, I'm going to be a wall of fire. You don't need another wall. I'm going to be the wall of fire around you. So we got to go back to Robert Frost. Is that wall to keep people out or to keep people in? And if you look at the way fire is used in the Bible, you'll find that when God is turning himself into fire, when there's a fiery representation of the living God, it's always to draw people to the fire. You remember the burning bush, don't you? It caused Moses to stop what he was doing and turn around and pay attention. You remember the fire by night that led the children of Israel through the wilderness? It was to let them know God was with them and to follow that. The fires that burn in the temple day and night were to represent the presence of the living God. God is here. And most Maybe importantly for us, on the day of Pentecost, the fiery tongues came upon all the church and emblazoned them with the fire of God and the power and the passion of God. The wall of fire that this is talking about is the presence of God that draws people to the community of faith. It is to neither keep people out or in. It's to draw people, a magnificent, powerful representation of the love and power of God that goes out into the community, and people say, look at that wall of fire. Look at that burning bush. Look at that fire by night. Look at the fire. We're going to come see what that is, and they come to see it. Now, I know when we're going through a period of 100-degree weather, as Pastor Kenny reminded us, maybe you don't think I'd like to get too close to a fire. Try not to think of the heat. Just think of the majesty. Just think of the stuff that would make you stop what you're doing and go see it. What he's saying is, you won't need a wall. I'm going to draw people to us. We're going to have a city without wall, and I'm going to draw all people here. And when they get here, they're going to find that inside this community is the glory of God. Oh, man, that is such a vision. You know, I've been to churches that look great on the outside, but when you get in, you wonder what happened here. You ever been to such? They got blue lines for visitors and red lines for this and purple lines for this, and they got all sorts of, but you get in there and you think, what's going on? There's not much, I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's church. You don't really sense the glory of God. And I've been in little bitty fellowships, maybe you have too, out in the country or maybe in the city in some urban area, and you walk in and it's not much to look at, but boy, when you get in there, you feel the power of God. God says, here's the vision. You build your faith community without walls. You welcome everybody. And I will be the wall of fire that will draw people, that beckon people, pull people in. And when they get into your faith community, they're going to find it's not empty, it's not dead, but the glory of God is alive and well and touching people for good. It's the same thing we're supposed to have personally, aren't we? We're supposed to live in such a way that we draw people to God, but when they get close to us, they should see that inside of us there's some integrity, and that what's inside of us is also loving to God, and we're doing our best. We're not perfect, but we're loving God inside and out, that there's no discrepancy, that we're not blatantly hypocritical. That's what the vision of the church is that we find from Zechariah, this young man looking the future. There's one other wall that I didn't mention today. The Western Wall, sometimes popularly called the Wailing Wall. Some of you have been there. It's a wall that's not any longer to keep anybody in or out. It's there as a symbol of the very presence of God. And Jewish folks go there, but Christian folks go there too, and Muslim folks go there even. And they write their prayers on pieces of paper. Have you seen this? They write their heart's desires, and they roll them up, and they push them into that wall. In fact, if you have a prayer, you can send it online to a seminary student, and that person will go to the wall and put your prayer in the wall. Why do people do that? Because they feel the presence of the living God. The wall of fire is right there. The glory of God is right there. They want to get as close as they can, and then when they place their prayer, they walk back out backwards. You're never to turn your back on the Western Wall. It's an act of disrespect. It's to show you don't reverence the presence of the living God. So you walk out backwards, watching that wall of fire, that wall of the presence of God. Glory outside and glory inside. That's what the church should be, amen? The church should be that. The church can be that. Rise up, church. Put your hands to the task. Rebuild the church according to the new vision of God, and God will bless. Amen.